The 2026 Senate race in the state of Maine is one that we just cannot stop talking about. This race has changed so much since the last time that we talked about it, and today we're going to be discussing just how much this race is going to play into the 2026 midterms and the Democrats' chances of winning control of the Senate in 2026. So if you're not already familiar, Troy Jackson is now the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party in the Senate seat in Maine. Now, if you're wondering why that is, it's because Graham Plattner ended up dropping out of this race after a scandal broke. I believe it was towards the end of June, beginning of July. And he ultimately dropped out of this race, leaving it up to the Democratic Party of the state of Maine to pick his replacement. That replacement likely being Troy Jackson, who will face off with Susan Collins in the November election. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what this means for this race and how Democrats go forward with just a short amount of time left to campaign for this race, truly, and how Susan Collins could actually end up losing this race to someone who only has a little over 100 days to campaign. Now, let's look at this from the statistical standpoint. Susan Collins has won in the state of Maine multiple times. This isn't her first rodeo, shall I say, in the state of Maine. If we go back to 2020, it was actually Sarah Gideon who faced off with Susan Collins, and in polling, Sarah Gideon was ahead. But Susan Collins ultimately ended up winning this race by about 8.5 percentage points, the same year that Donald Trump lost the presidency to former President Joe Biden. So, of course, if we want to go back to 2014, Susan Collins wins this race by 37 points. Again, going back to 2020, wins it by 8.6%. And now in 2026, polling would have you believe that Susan Collins is yet again going to lose this race. But in multiple aspects and in ways that we need to pay attention to, that's not so cut and dry, shall I say. Susan Collins absolutely is the underdog in this race. She has a tougher time winning in a state that Kamala Harris won in 2024, but Susan Collins is the type of candidate that if anybody wants to run as a Republican in Maine, you have to be Susan Collins wanting to do that. So, Susan Collins in the Vote Hub tally, currently sitting at about 48.8% to Troy Jackson's 51.2%, and Vote Hub gives Troy Jackson about a 62.1% chance of winning this seat in Maine. If we also go over to the poly market betting odds, the poly market betting odds also have Troy Jackson as the type of candidate who would win this race, 68% to the Republicans' 33%, currently as the winner for this race in Maine come November. So, why are we talking about this race so much? Well, I mean, of course, the big reason is that this is a toss-up race, truly. This is a race that Democrats have had their eye on since 2020 when Susan Collins won re-election there just 6 years ago. But today, we're looking at a possibility where Troy Jackson, someone who has a little over 100 days to campaign, could end up being the next senator from the state of Maine and unseating Susan Collins, a long-term senator from the state Democrats who have been looking to unseat for a number of years now. So, with that said, let's go look at this polling that has came out, I believe today, if not, I apologize, from the University of New Hampshire. It has Troy Jackson sitting at 49% to Susan Collins' 46%. Now, overall, this is a pretty substantial poll, and one that Democrats should really be optimistic about. Given the circumstances of this race in Maine, this race looked like it could be a long-gone seat after these scandals started breaking with Graham Plattner. Ultimately ends up dropping out of the race, leaving the door open for the Democratic Party to make this pick on who should replace him as the Democratic nominee. And Troy Jackson being the one to face Susan Collins. Now looking at a optimistic poll from the University of New Hampshire, a reliable and a very strong pollster through the New England area. So Susan Collins sitting at 46%, Troy Jackson at 49%. So with that said, can Troy Jackson unseat Susan Collins? Absolutely. I mean, with the way that this race has played out thus far, nothing has truly, I think, surprised anyone, given the circumstances of the race and given everything that has happened. But one thing is for certain, and that is that Troy Jackson is a much better type, less scandalous candidate than, say, Graham Plattner. That's to deserve no disrespect to Graham Plattner, but it's just the truth. Troy Jackson does not bring the scandal side that Graham Plattner brought, and Susan Collins isn't going to be able to use that against Troy Jackson like Graham Plattner. Although Susan Collins may still bring up the fact that the Democratic Party did nominate Graham Plattner before he ended up dropping out of this race as the Democratic nominee. She may bring that up through this campaign. We'll see. There are things that both sides are able to bring up. While Susan Collins isn't necessarily a controversial candidate, not someone who has a ton of scandals, she did say that she would only run for 2 terms, back when she was originally elected in the 90s, and ultimately has not kept her word on that. So with that said, Troy Jackson, a candidate who absolutely has a shot of winning this race in the state of Maine, and giving Democrats a pickup opportunity truly of a lifetime. I mean, if we look at this Senate map, we're looking at the possibility that if Democrats win the state of North Carolina, like I've said on my channel for a long time that I believe is likely to happen, they win Maine and they win Alaska. These are the 3 seats that currently Mary Peltola has a 50.8% chance. North Carolina, huge advantage for Roy Cooper, sitting at 87.6%, like we talked about here at Troy Jackson, 62.1% for the state of Maine. That leaves one opportunity that Democrats need to pick from, and the 2 opportunities that they have the best chance at would be Texas, with James Tallarico facing off with, again, scandal candidate Ken Paxton, or in Ohio, where John Husted, the appointed senator, former lieutenant governor from the state, faces off with former Senator Sherrod Brown. Houston's sitting at about 51.1% chance of winning that race. So, of course, Democrats only, if they're able to flip the state of Maine, North Carolina, and Alaska, that would leave one more seat that they would need to flip to gain control of the Senate come 2026. So, huge opportunity, huge advantage for Democrats here if they're able to take this seat in Maine and truly and win it for the first time in a long, long time, win across the state, and ultimately have a Democrat representing the state of Maine in that second Senate seat that they have in the state. So, one final point I also want to take a look at is back when Graham Plattner dropped out of this race, we were sitting at Democrats about 53% chance of winning this race. That was July 4th at 8 p.m. And since then, since Graham Plattner dropped out about July 7th at 8 a.m., we were looking at 60%, and since then it's only grown. I mean, of course, we go back to May, Democrats were looking at nearly an 80% chance of winning this race. They're not quite back to that point, but ultimately still in good territory on the betting odds side of things as well. So with that all said, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What do you guys think about this Senate seat in Maine? Do you think that that with the new candidate that they're able to win this race with Troy Jackson, or do you believe that Susan Collins is ultimately going to hold on